All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class, I'm doing a series of videos that are based off of the textbook that we're using for the class, and that's Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition. I've just started, so I'm in the middle of Chapter 1. All right. Now, when you go and put styles onto a web page, the book is actually a little bit misinforming here. And what I mean is there's actually three ways that you can provide styles. They show the two that are used 99.9% of the time, but there is a third way. The first way, as mentioned right there, is to use an external style sheet. In other words, you'll have a separate file into which you will put all of your CSS or cascading style sheet code. That's typically done if you want to be able, if you've got several pages in a website and they're all sharing the same CSS file. All right. Sometimes you've got stuff that's just specific to a certain page. And when you do that, quite often what you will do is you will use style tags, as are shown in the second example. That goes in the head section. And it really should always go underneath the link tag that you see up above it, if you're going to have both of them in there. The third way that they don't show right there is what's known as inline. So this is external CSS, internal CSS, and there's also inline CSS. And inline CSS, if you've ever looked, and for example, if you've ever noticed, like you looked at a kid's story and it says once upon a time, and just the O in the word once, just that is in really big letters. All right. Then as an example, that O might end up being what is, you've got some inline CSS with that. All right. So it says the sequence in which styles are applied, styles from external style sheets and embedded. So in other words, the ones that are internal here take precedence over the ones that are external there. And the ones that are inline that I just mentioned to you but didn't demo, they take precedence even over these. All right. A head element that includes two style sheets, you very well could have two different style sheets. Again, especially as your style sheets become bigger and bigger, what a lot of people do is they end up breaking them down into separate sheets, maybe one for each page or whatever. As it says, the sequence in which styles are applied. So anything that's in here in main.css, if anything happens to be overridden in speaker.css, that'll take precedence because it was listed after main.css. You can apply these CSS things to classes, to IDs. You can apply them to just selectors, like if I wanted to take all the H1s, for example, or all of the paragraphs. Here, notice that we're applying blue to just these two paragraphs, but not to this paragraph. Here, we're applying copyright to just this paragraph and not these. All right? But you'll notice one thing. Class equal blue, since it's a class, it's used in multiple areas. And actually, this class equal blue is applied right here. So is another class called right. All right? But this ID only appears once on the page. So it's an ID as opposed to a class. So there's examples here. What they call elements by type, usually they're just called selectors. The body element, the main element, the H1. But this applies by default to everything in the body, everything in main, all H1 tags, all P tags. This would be just for the ID of copyright. This would be anything to which you'd apply the class of blue or the class of right. And there's some examples of what you get. Now they're showing in here, it says the CSS file for a typical application. It's true. And notice they're typically, not always, but you typically end up going from more general to more specific when you put this in. So the body, that's about the most general thing you have. What we're going to end up putting up even before the body is typically what's called a reset. And then we'll have the body. Then you'll have, your H1s, your paragraphs, etc. Then your divs, etc. And there's no exact science to this. Different people do it in different ways. Some terms related to CSS. That's what CSS stands for, Cascading Style Sheets. If we look here, that's a style rule. If we look at this example right here, property declaration, span is the property. The property, actually the style rule is for spans. The property is color and the attribute is red. The property is margin left, the attribute is 1em. The property is margin right, the attribute is 0.5em. So as you can see, they're doing what they can here to pretty this up and make it look more professional. 4 ways to run an HTML page that's on your server. Well, let's talk about the one that you're going to use in this class, which is not even listed in here. And that is that 99 times out of 100, if you're going to use the recommended editor, which is VS Code, you will just, we will add the live server extension to it. You'll just right mouse click and you'll choose open with live server. So this stuff isn't really that appropriate anymore. It's not that it doesn't work, of course it does, but it's not probably the one you're going to use. The components of a URL, more and more where it says HTTP there, it's being replaced with HTTPS, which is a more secure HTTP. Then you've got your domain name, and optionally you might have a path. And if you have a path, optionally you might have a file name in there. You can have this without a path, which means it's right at the root. If you don't put in a path or a file name, typically it defaults. And it looks for a file name index.html. If it doesn't find that, it looks for a file called index.htm. If it doesn't find that, it looks for a file called default.html. If it doesn't find that, it looks for a file called default.htm, etc. All right. Now we're going to work quite a bit in here with the console and with, basically the inspector, which is kind of the console plus. And here we're getting an error. It says cannot read property value of null. So that says in your file here that's called emaillist.js, this is saying that in line 6, there's an error. There's something that you're attempting to do in there that is not legal. To open up the developer tools, the easiest way to do it is to either right mouse click and choose inspect if you're in Chrome, or hit the F12 key. And it turns itself on with F12 and it turns itself off with F12. How to find a JavaScript statement that caused the error, it's what I just mentioned. You'll open the console and you'll look for it. All right. The sources panel will show you the actual code, and then you can go and look at the line in question. All right, this should have been email_2 here. That's what the error is. All right, we're going to work quite a bit in here with VS Code. By the end of the first week, you'll probably know as much as I know about VS Code. It's a learning experience. You can go online and you can find all sorts of extensions and helpers. We will add some of those for our VS Code. Anytime that we add something, the only one that you're really probably going to, quote, have to add, unquote, is live server. Some of the other ones I'll suggest you may agree that you need, or you might think that they're a pain and you don't want them. If you don't want them, don't load them. All right. When we download, and we will do this as a class, VS Code, you'll see how easy it is to start and how easy it is to bring files and folders in. All right, I'm not going to go through this stuff. It's much easier to do that in class. This is what VS Code will look like by default. You can change the background color. I already have. Mine is light by default. All right, some people find this dark color easier to read. I find especially for when I make my videos that I think the light is easier to read. You may agree, you may not agree. Again, we'll go through preview or opening files, closing and saving files, adding, rename, and deleting files. We'll go through all that stuff. All right. When we're working on this stuff, you'll notice after a while that there'll be IntelliSense. And IntelliSense just means that there'll be some stuff that you can look at that will automatically be filled in for you. In other words, the computer tries to guess what you're trying to do next. And quite often, it'll guess correctly. If you hear any noise, we've got some thunder behind me in the background. So if I have to turn this off real quick, it's because I'm afraid of lightning striking the computer. I am plugged in right now. All right. How to identify errors? Well, you can get the errors in VS Code. All right. And I'm not going to go through that right now, but we will talk about that in class. All right. And again, we will talk about how to install extensions. It's not hard. Literally, you click right here on extensions, and then in the window here, like if we wanted live server, you type live server in here, and one of these that would come up in here would be live server. You click the install button. Sometimes when you click install, you have to restart Visual Studio Code for it to take effect. Most times you don't. So we will install again in the browser so you can see how it's used. And as I already mentioned, by the end of the first week, you're going to know a lot about how to use this. It's not rocket science, as they say. All right, so when I come back again, well, I thought I had it here, but I guess I don't. We're going to go into Chapter 2, which is Getting Started Fast with JavaScript. And I'll be back with that shortly.